So Donald Trump just sabotaged his own authority while picking a fight with a system he thought he could dominate without consequences. The pressure hesitated in plain sight. Dead quiet. What hung in the air was the cost of believing intimidation automatically unlocks obedience. Trump pushed anyway, turning a public threat into a clumsy wager that assumed fear would do the work for him. The response was stillness, procedural, and cold. A system that refused to move an inch or acknowledge the performance. No leverage. That moment stripped the noise of its magic. For years, volume had been enough, and now it wasn't. The strongman fantasy ran straight into something that doesn't flinch, bargain, or react on cue. There was no counterpunch, no outrage, no drama to feed on. Just rules doing their job without emotion. That kind of silence is unforgiving. It leaves nowhere to hide and nothing to spin. Let me fill you in on what's been happening. Donald Trump came back to power carrying a chip on his shoulder and a clock in his head. He wasn't interested in governing slowly or repairing trust. He needed a confrontation to prove that America First still meant forcing others to bend on demand. Trump didn't return with data. Trump didn't return with preparation. Trump returned with grievance, impatience, and the old instinct to swing first and ask questions later. That reflex has always been his operating system. To ignite Trump's base, there must always be an enemy. Not because that target broke rules, but because it photographs well and triggers applause. The choice is about convenience, not culpability. Whether it was allies ordered to submit, or institutions told to stay quiet, or norms treated like optional suggestions, the move was always identical. Threats came first. Concessions were demanded next. Public humiliation followed if compliance wasn't instant. But this time, that assumption collapsed. They knew he would come back, they knew he would be aggressive, and they built a strategy designed to neutralize his chaos with boring, relentless stability. Trump escalated anyway. He raised the stakes, convinced the other side would sprint toward negotiations just to stop the noise. Instead, the response stayed cold and exact, pressing where it hurts politically and economically, leaving the White House frozen mid-performance. If you're watching this unfold, don't look away. Pay attention to who absorbs the cost when spectacle replaces competence. Because while Trump chased headlines, workers were left hanging, shifts grew uncertain, overtime turned fragile, job security started to wobble. When Trump picks a fight he can't win, it's never his life that pays the price. At first glance, this looks like just another clash of personalities. But if you zoom out, a very specific pattern snaps into focus. It begins with someone stepping forward in good faith, loyal, disciplined, and publicly willing to shield Donald Trump from criticism when it mattered most. The defense was loud, consistent, and costly. The benefit to Trump was obvious. The loyalty was real. Then the line appeared. Not a dramatic one, not a theatrical refusal. Just a quiet moment where that person declined to do the one thing that crossed a legal or ethical boundary. No grand speech, no rebellion, just a refusal to step off the edge. Trump didn't negotiate, he didn't pause, he turned instantly, attacking in public, stripping credibility, isolating the person, and recasting loyalty as betrayal. The tone hardened, the insults escalated. The former ally became disposable overnight. The message was clear. Loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. And then it happened again. Another figure entered the orbit with professionalism, restraint, and a willingness to absorb heat on Trump's behalf. The posture was careful, the support was visible, the protection was real. The moment arrived when restraint mattered. A request surfaced that required crossing a boundary that could not be uncrossed without consequence. The answer wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, it was no. Trump reacted the same way. Public smearing, character assassination, pressure applied until silence or submission became the only acceptable outcomes. The system shifted to punish resistance, not wrongdoing. The message was clear. Loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. And the pattern repeated. Once more, someone stood beside Trump with institutional credibility and personal risk, willing to hold the line publicly, even as pressure mounted behind closed doors. The relationship worked as long as obedience stayed total. Then came the limit. A rule, a boundary, a refusal to make reality disappear on command, no theatrics, just restraint. Trump detonated the relationship on sight. He framed refusal as treason, turned allies into enemies, and used humiliation as enforcement. The exit was violent, not physical, but reputational and deliberate. The message was clear. Loyalty to Trump supersedes loyalty to the law. Once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. Anyone who refuses to cross the line is disposable. And that is the rule governing power inside Trump's world. What happened next was a moral inversion hiding in plain sight. An ally was recast as an enemy, not for breaking rules, but for refusing to break them. The crime wasn't disloyalty. The crime was restraint. In Trump's framing, saying no to illegality becomes hostility, and that flip tells you everything. On one side stood rules that were written to slow power down, to force friction, to protect institutions from impulse. On the other stood Donald Trump, treating those same rules as vandalism targets, obstacles to smash the moment they stopped serving him. These weren't foreign constraints. These were American guardrails. And Trump wanted them gone. The reaction was immediate and human. Businesses froze decisions. Markets tensed. Voters felt the anxiety seep in. People stopped trusting the ground under their feet because instability is contagious. Think about that. Chaos doesn't stay in speeches. It leaks into paychecks, plans, and confidence. And then the brand cracked. Donald Trump sells himself as an economic strongman, the deal maker who creates certainty through force. But here was the truth laid bare. The risk wasn't the opponent. The risk was Trump himself. He was the volatility. He was the variable no one could price. This is where the no-win box snaps shut. If Trump escalates, he burns political capital, donor confidence, and business patience all at once. The economic anxiety spreads, the political cost compounds. The damage accelerates because no one trusts the next move. If Trump retreats, the mask falls. His base sees hesitation, his bluff is exposed. The strongman fantasy collapses under its own weight. There is no third door. And inside the Republican Party, the fracture widens. The business wing wants predictability. MAGA Republicans crave confrontation. Moderates see the cliff edge and hesitate. No one gets what they want. The party stalls in full view, stuck between spectacle and survival, with no clean exit and no agreement on what comes next. That's the moment the fight stopped being political and started becoming institutional. A formal structure stepped in, not to argue narratives, not to trade insults, but to impose limits. This wasn't cable news anymore. This was the system entering the room. The suspicion was unavoidable. Donald Trump was stretching executive power like elastic, pulling on emergency language and implied authority to slip past Congress and avoid friction. No details needed. The move was familiar. When rules slow him down, he looks for shortcuts. Normally, courts hesitate. They defer. They step back the moment someone waves the words national security. This time, that reflex broke. The justification was too thin. The reach was too naked. And the bench didn't blink. Let that sink in. What followed mattered even more. Conservative voices didn't rush to defend Trump. Legal conservatives, institutional conservatives, people who usually flinch when power is challenged. They didn't. Some went quiet. Others peeled away. The reflex to frame this as partisan noise failed. At the core, the collision was simple and dangerous. Executive power versus legislative restraint. If a president can do this without consequence, separation of powers becomes a suggestion instead of a rule. And once that line bends, it doesn't snap back easily. The fallout didn't stay abstract. Confidence eroded. Investment hesitated. Prices felt pressure. Election nerves crept in, not because of ideology, but because instability poisons planning. People don't bet on chaos. They brace against it. So the question shifted. Not whether Donald Trump was angry, not whether his base approved, but whether a presidency that treats limits as optional can still claim legitimacy once the system has clearly said, no, this is no longer about trade disputes, allies, or a single confrontation spun for headlines. The frame has shifted, and it matters. What's colliding now is rules versus raw power, governance versus impulse, friction versus force. Think about that. When a system built on limits meets a leader who treats limits as an insult, something fundamental gives way. Donald Trump has never tolerated boundaries. He despises waiting. He loathes process. He treats delay as sabotage and restraint as disloyalty. In his world, power is only real if it moves instantly and obeys one voice. Anything slower is weakness. Anything shared is betrayal. That intolerance isn't a quirk, it's the engine. Here's where the danger deepens. If behavior like this is accepted once, it doesn't stay isolated. It hardens into precedent. Once it becomes precedent, it stops feeling extreme. Once it stops feeling extreme, it survives the person who normalized it. And the next leader inherits the tool, sharper, quieter, and more disciplined. That's the chain. Acceptance becomes permission. Permission becomes habit. Habit becomes architecture. This is how democratic decay actually works. Not with sirens or tanks, but with exhaustion. Norms erode through repetition. The public adapts, the extraordinary becomes routine because people get tired of fighting every breach. What once felt unacceptable slowly blends into the background until outrage itself feels pointless. And the cost isn't abstract. It shows up in confidence and planning, in whether people trust the rules to hold tomorrow, in whether businesses invest or freeze, in whether families feel stability or constant whiplash. Chaos doesn't just thrill crowds, it taxes everyone else, and that matters. Here's the part that often gets ignored. Voters don't need a law degree to feel instability. They reward competence when it shows up in predictability. They punish chaos when it hits routines, paychecks, savings, and peace of mind. Spectacle entertains briefly, incompetence lingers. Be honest. So here's the choice, hanging in the air, unresolved and intensifying. A serious nation governed by friction, limits, and boring reliability. Or a reality TV state run on threats, tantrums, and ego. Governance versus spectacle. Restraint versus domination. This isn't settled yet. The legal battles are only beginning. The economic consequences are only starting to reach everyday life. The system has pushed back, but the pressure hasn't disappeared. It's building. Watching this isn't passive. Pay attention to every boundary tested and every silence that follows. This story isn't over. It's heating up.